get going here. We've got 3 panels designated today, and we'll see where that lands and how long it lasts and all that. But that said, we're going to start with our Maryland State Department of Education panel. We've got Dr. Joshua Michael, the president, and we've got Dr. Carrie Wright, our state superintendent of schools. This is for all the presenters today. We already have your presentations are loaded up on here, so we're good to go on all fronts. And we're going to start with you, Dr. Michael. Dr. Wright, you want to come up as well? And again, we've got slide presentation, hard copies here and then on the screen. And so take the time you need to tell us what you want to tell us about the blueprint for Maryland's future.
Excellent. All right, ready? Yeah. Mics are working? Good. You got us?
Yep, they're
okay,
good.
Great.
It's all good.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and jump in. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the implementation of the blueprint on behalf of the State Board and the Maryland State Department of Education. I am Dr. Josh Michael, President of the Maryland State Board of Education, and with me today, I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Carrie Wright, State Superintendent of Schools. The blueprint for Maryland's future represents the most comprehensive public school reform currently underway in the United States. As a product of Maryland Public Schools, a former middle school math teacher in Baltimore City, and a Baltimore City school parent now, the work of improving our public schools in Maryland is personal. The goal of the blueprint is to develop a world-class public education system in Maryland, ranked among the top states in the country. Fundamentally, the blueprint reshapes structures of opportunity for young people in Maryland, particularly for our at-promise students, with equity by design. We are pleased to report meaningful progress today across all 5 pillars of this major education reform law. I'm pleased to turn it over now to Dr. Wright.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and it is an absolute honor to serve as your state superintendent. Since the last time I was before you, I got to celebrate a very exciting milestone. My kindergarten grandson started his first day of school this year. So as you can imagine, I could not resist surprising him on day 1, and it was so much fun to see the magic of school through his little eyes. But he came home to my daughter that day. He was really confused, and he says, "Mommy, why was Cece at my school today?" And I said, it's just so sweet to see all those little kindergartners in on the first day, and that's really where the magic happens. As you know, I have spent the vast majority of my life and my career in Maryland. My 2 daughters are here, and they are Maryland Public School graduates, so it's an absolute joy to be back home. And doing this work on the blueprint is a real privilege. When I've attended national conferences and spoken with colleagues in other states about the blueprint, they cannot believe the reform that is taking place here. The blueprint has leaders from other states both impressed and a little jealous. MSDE and the Accountability Implementation Board have been working in lockstep over the past 18 months to better support the implementation of the blueprint. Our organizations meet weekly at the staff level, monthly at the leadership level, and quarterly at the board level, and our last joint meeting was just yesterday. We want to further align our efforts. MSDE and the AIB have also worked collaboratively with Maryland's 24 local education agencies to improve implementation and solve challenges as they arise. All our actions center on doing what is right for students. We are entering the 4th year of the blueprint's implementation since the law was enacted in 2021. We are clear-eyed in our shared commitment to the blueprint, the promise it carries for public education, and the core values and strategies outlined in the plan. We believe the blueprint pointed us in the right direction 4 years ago. And in order to stay on that trajectory, we must continue to adapt the blueprint to meet the realities of public education in 2025. We are pleased to highlight key achievements across each of the blueprint's 5 pillars. Dr. Michael.
Excellent. Let's start off with Pillar 1. As you know, early childhood education we have expanded access to full-day pre-kindergarten in all corners of the state. This school year, we have over 24,000 students enrolled in publicly funded full-day pre-K, and that's an increase of nearly 9,000 students since the adoption of the blueprint. We have 34,000 students enrolled in pre-K, including half and full-day programs together, with about 28,000 students, 28,000 4-year-olds, nearly 6,000 3-year-olds. This past fall, we added over 6,000 publicly funded full-day pre-K seats. 46% of these new seats were in private childcare settings. Partnering with both partnering with both local systems and private providers, we are focused and poised to accelerate pre-K enrollment moving into school year 2025-26. Yesterday, along with the AIB, we established policy direction in the mixed delivery system for public providers to focus on maximizing the number of Tier 1 4-year-olds enrolled, while private providers focus on expanding access for Tier 1 3-year-olds and truly building out that sliding scale for 4-year-olds. MSDE's Push to Pre-K initiative continues to bring new private providers on board. Family child care providers, child care centers, Head Start programs, faith-based programs, Spanish-speaking providers to help build our mixed delivery public pre-K system. We are pleased to continue expanding wraparound supports for young children and families through key strategies of the blueprint. We have opened 38 new Judy Center early learning hubs since 2022, which brings the total number of current Judy Centers to 93 statewide. In FY24, Judy Center served more than 14,000, nearly 15,000 families, and approaching 18,000 children from birth to age 5. Last fiscal year, Patty Centers provided vital services to 571 families, serving over 700 children, really focused on that birth to age 3 range. Services included case management, parent training, in-home intervention visits, family child activities, and child development services. Transitioning now to Pillar 2, which you know focuses on elevating the profession for educators, we continue to make critical strides in teacher development and compensation. All 24 LEAs have confirmed at least a 10% salary increase for teachers between 2019 and 2024, and all LEAs are on track for that base starting teacher salary of $60,000 by 2026. In fiscal year 2025, MSDE awarded $783,000 to 20 LEAs for training and support for national board certification candidates and professional learning facilitators to really build out that robust pipeline. In December 2024, over 1,000 teachers earned their national board certification. We now have 2,279 teachers designated as national board certified teachers statewide. And I do want to emphasize that that number reflects who is actually in a teacher position. We have even more nationally board certified teachers leading across our education system. I do want to take a moment, I'm sure our colleagues at AIB will address this, but we are truly leading in building out and the number and the share of nationally board certified teachers nationally, and our leader in the number of educators of color receiving that distinction. As of this year, all LEAs have successfully launched levels 1 through 3 of the educator career ladder, providing pathways for educators to take on leadership roles while remaining in the classroom. While we are proud of the progress to date, we do recognize there's significant more work to be done. Just 12% of NBC teachers are in low-performing schools. And while the share of NBC teachers of color has increased to 19%, it still lags in representing the over 30% of educators of color across Maryland, which also lags below the 2/3 of students of color that we have in the state. We also know that our teachers in high-poverty schools are twice as likely to be inexperienced, out of field, and provisionally licensed than lower poverty schools. The educator shortage continues to be a reality in public schools that we must navigate. We are pleased to report that the teacher vacancy rate is down, but that it still persists at a rate that is way too high at 1,600. The proliferation of conditionally licensed teachers in Maryland has also emerged as a new reality since the adoption of the blueprint, as leaders in your community step up to serve in classrooms that didn't have a teacher in them. Today, we have over 6,000 conditionally certified or licensed teachers in Maryland, triple the number when you first passed the blueprint, and 7 times the number when the Kirwan Commission began its work nearly a decade ago. That means, at home, 1 in 10 of your classrooms is either staffed by a substitute teacher or an unlicensed teacher. Today, 1 in 3 of teachers hired in Maryland are not a licensed teacher before entering the classroom. Over 60%, though, of our conditionally licensed teachers are Black and brown educators, which are more often from the communities that they serve. This presents an opportunity to support and develop leaders from your neighborhoods who have stepped up to serve students in our public schools. We must wrap our arms around these teachers to support the development of our educators of color and to promote student achievement in high-poverty communities. Enrollment in Maryland educator preparation programs has increased since 2016-17, reversing a trend, but our programs are not yet producing more graduates. And to date, we fill no more than 1 in 5 of our teacher vacancies with graduates from our traditional ed prep programs. We continue to be a net importer of teachers from other states, but that supply is drying up. We are importing less than we used to. The teacher shortage makes the implementation of collaborative time, as first envisioned by the blueprint, impossible to implement without sacrificing instructional time or growing class sizes for students. Before we can begin recruiting the 15,000 new teachers, and I'll stop here, it's not 15,000 next year, but eventually 15,000, but it would call for at least 1,500 or 2,000 as it is proposed next year. Before we can do that, we need to focus on licensing our 6,000 conditionally educators who have already answered the call to serve our children and fill the 1,600 vacant classrooms. As educators, we at MSDE fundamentally understand that more collaborative time and professional learning is critical to improving those work conditions for educators we hope to retain and attract to teaching. That's why we support the implementation of pilot programs that allow schools to develop innovative models to implement collaborative time, while we simultaneously invest in grow your own programs and expand state and local professional development for teachers. If we are to deliver on the promise of the blueprint, we must deepen and strengthen our teacher pipeline. Grow your own teacher preparation programs lead to professional teacher licensure while earning a wage with benefits and receiving on-the-job training. Grow your own programs are focused on recruiting and preparing candidates from neighborhoods in your districts, at home, to teach in your schools, increasing retention of currently under-licensed educators, and strengthening connections between teachers and students and families in your community. I'm now pleased to turn it over to Dr. Wright, who will discuss Pillars 3, 4, and 5.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. Under Pillar 3, College and Career Readiness, we have convened standards and framework validation committees across multiple content areas, and we continue to make significant progress. The Health Education and Physical Education Committee is on track to present their recommendations for new state standards and revised frameworks to the board in June. The Literacy Committee is finalizing its first phase of the validation process, preparing to present its progress to the board in May. The Math Committee has been meeting biweekly since September 2024, focusing on coherence, rigor, and alignment from pre-K through integrated algebra, with revised standards anticipated for public comment in May. The Social Studies Committee, named Educate to Stop the Hate Committee in honor of this body's leadership last session, has completed its proposed framework revisions, set to release for a 30-day public comment period next month, with final adoption scheduled for March. Across all committees, the work reflects a commitment to equity, clarity, and improved outcomes for students. This fall, we adopted the Maryland Comprehensive Pre-K through Grade 3 Literacy Policy to ensure every student receives equitable, effective, and evidence-based research instruction, reading instruction, that prepares them for long-term academic success. The literacy policy focuses on progress monitoring, prevention, intervention, transparency, accountability, and parent choice. The most recent version of the literacy policy includes requirements for promotion to 4th grade. This is not a retention policy, as some have suggested. The promotion components of the policy are about focusing the attention on teachers, administrators, families, and students on a critical benchmark, 3rd grade reading proficiency. When we shine a light on key benchmarks, we are able to focus our educational ecosystem on the key milestones that matter and surge supports to enable our children to meet important targets along their educational journey. The policy is a parent choice policy that empowers 3rd grade families to provide informed consent to their child's promotion or retention. The policy gives the parents the power to make this decision and to do so as a part of the team with their child's educators, and essential information about their child's progress right at their fingertips. This commitment was also bolstered by a $40 million grant from the United States Department of Education, which is driving improvements in literacy instruction across our schools. Additionally, a generous $6.8 million philanthropic contribution from the IBIS Group is providing tuition-free access for teachers, leaders, and paraeducators statewide to a micro-credential program focused on instructional practices aligned with the science of reading. At yesterday's State Board meeting, our team introduced a comprehensive mathematics policy. We're excited about the work ahead in math and hope to pass this policy in March. MSDE is deeply engaged in the career and technical education space. Our team is redesigning all CTE pathways, reviewing and updating all course level standards, and developing best practices and real-world examples of how LEAs can modify their master schedules to ensure that students have the opportunity to participate in advanced courses, dual enrollment, and apprenticeships. Our Office of College and Career Pathways recently launched the, quote, I Choose to Teach CTE campaign, which highlights the many talented CTE teachers who chose to leave industry and teach in Maryland's classrooms. We're excited to promote these educator stories and others throughout the month of February, which is designated as National CTE Month. The Career and Technical Education Committee, in partnership with MSDE, has established new policies related to apprenticeships and industry-recognized credentials. Though we have a lot more work to do as a state, last year, 8 times more students were participating in apprenticeships than just 3 years earlier. We now have over 1,000 students participating in apprenticeships statewide. These efforts lay the groundwork to significantly increase the number of students taking advantage of CTE opportunities and prepare them for high-demand careers. While the demand for work-based learning remains high, we are working with businesses across Maryland to expand partnerships. Just today, the release of Maryland student achievement scores on the 2024 National Assessment of Educational Progress, better known as NAEP. Referred to as the nation's report card, NAEP is a congressionally mandated assessment of 4th and 8th grade reading and math performance given every 2 years. NAEP is the only test administered nationwide that allows direct comparison of student achievement across states because all students take the same test. Maryland NAEP scores have dropped dramatically over the past decade. In 2013, Maryland was among the top 2 highest performing states on NAEP, but by 2022, our ranking had fallen to 40th. But I'm excited to share good news from the results released this morning. I am pleased to report that Maryland students made real progress in reading and modest progress in math. Our 4th grade reading scores now rank 20th in the nation, up from 40th just 2 years prior. This is a promising improvement, and the Blueprint's investments are paying off. This chart shows the scale score for NAEP in 4th grade reading at each of the benchmark percentile rankings. Each line represents the scale score, if you start at the bottom, for the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentile in terms of their performance. What's important to note is how, from 2013 to 2024, the gap between our highest performing students and our lowest performing students widened over this time. This mirrors a national trend, and we have work to do to close this. You can see here that the scale score for our lowest performing students at the 10th percentile has decreased over time. You will also note that at the bottom 2 percentiles, at the 10th and the 25th, Maryland is one of the few states whose students' scores ticked up. So that's a significant progress for us. The same is true for 8th grade reading. You want to flip through these slides? Yeah.
Nope, 8th grade reading.
8th grade reading, sorry, 4th grade math, and 8th grade math. It will be important for us to monitor this and ensure that we are offering the support and intervention needed to ensure academic excellence for all learners. I have no doubt that with time and strategic investments in evidence-based practices, we will continue to see more improvement and close the gap between our highest and our lowest performing students. We have deeply committed teachers in Maryland, and we are going to continue investing in them. Our government and philanthropic partners are showing their trust in our work through more funding and grants. Over 5,000 teachers and administrators across the state have already registered for courses to deepen their knowledge of high-quality literacy instruction. We are working urgently in pursuit of a goal to get Maryland back in the top 10 of NAEP performers and to make Maryland schools the best in the nation, and we will not stop until we get there. Pillar 4, providing more resources to ensure all students are successful, and we are prioritizing our at-promise students. Community schools provide wraparound services for students and families based on the specific needs of the community. Maryland has emerged as a national leader in supporting community schools. In the fall of 2023, we added 103 more community schools, and in the fall of 2024, we added an additional 167. We have now identified schools serving 55% or more students living in poverty, and we have expanded to a total of 621 community schools across the state. We are encouraged that the administration's plan addresses implementation challenges by providing robust training and support to schools and leveraging partnerships to combat child poverty. We are glad to see that the plan includes additional bandwidth for our Department of Community Schools, which right now has a sum total of 2 people to help 621 schools across the state, or 45% of all of our schools. Over the past 18 months, the Blueprint for Special Education Work Group has convened 15 times to thoroughly evaluate the services, instruction, and funding allocated for students with disabilities. This diverse work group comprises public school educators and administrators, higher education faculty, legislators, advocates, parents, and special education experts. By this past December, the work group formulated 23 pivotal recommendations and is currently developing a prioritized implementation plan for extensive discussions and refinement. A comprehensive final report detailing recommendations, activities, and implementation is expected to be released in May. In addition to addressing the needs of students with disabilities, we are intensifying our efforts to support multilingual learners and their families. MSDE has partnered with Community Well, Maryland Latinos United, and Casa de Maryland in a joint forum to foster collaboration and strengthen community engagement. Last December, the state successfully completed the ML Family Coordinator Training Series, equipping coordinators with strategies to foster family engagement, advocacy, and access to critical services. Currently, we are delivering focused professional development opportunities aimed at closing achievement gaps in literacy and math for our multilingual learners. These efforts are designed to align with our state accountability frameworks, ensuring that all these students have the resources that they need to thrive academically and socially. Pillar 5 focuses, as you can see, on governance and accountability. Our expert review teams, comprising of educators and subject matter experts, conducted comprehensive visits to 130 schools across 24 LEAs during the 23-24 school year. This included 30 visits visited by the ERTs, the expert review teams, and 80 schools that were reviewed by our literacy review teams. These teams evaluate blueprint implementation and work collaboratively with school leaders to identify and address gaps, strengthen local implementation plans, and enhance instructional practices. Building on this momentum, the expert review teams are expanding their reach in the current year to more than 150 schools with a heightened focus on improving literacy and math instruction. We have also launched the Blueprint Financial Reporting System. This platform allows us to track and ensure compliance with the Blueprint's funding requirements. In fiscal year 24, all LEAs were given access to the system to participate in a beta test year. The system establishes fiscal year 2025 as our baseline year, and final fiscal year 2025 data will become available in the reporting system in the fall. I know the committee is also interested about our stance as a state on cell phones in schools. So we have opened this discussion with our local superintendents, and here's what we know. Every district has a policy on cell phone use. 19 districts have recently updated their cell phone policy, and others are currently reviewing and updating their policies. Most districts have prohibited cell phones from elementary and middle school students and allowed high school students to use cell phones during non-instructional time, such as lunch and class transitions. Many districts include exceptions to their policies, such as monitoring a health condition if it is mandated by a student's IEP or 504 plan. The majority of districts have taken action that have engaged stakeholders, such as parents and teachers, before implementing a policy. And several districts are piloting a policy in a subset of schools. We have launched the Maryland Task Force on Cell Phone Use in Schools. Beginning this month and continuing over the next few months, this task force will develop research-informed guidance to support school districts in creating and implementing their own policies on students' personal device use in school. This task force includes parents, students, teachers, administrators, and superintendents across the state. The task force will prioritize flexibility for each district in designing their policy. Each district's policy will be different and will reflect the insights and engagement of its own educators, parents, and students. I know members of this committee are also interested in our most recent Maryland school report card ratings, which were released in December for the 23-24 school year. The ratings and downloadable reports are also available on our website, marylandreportcard.com. You can also find disaggregated data showing the performance of each student group by school. How do we do in 23-24 compared to 22-23? Across all types, more schools earned 4 or 5 stars compared to the prior school year. There was also a decrease in the number of schools receiving 1 or 2 stars, which are our lowest performers. We're glad to see this progress. That being said, it's important to note that we have concerns about our state accountability system's effectiveness. 83% of our schools are rated as 3, 4, or 5 stars, and at the same time, only 48% of our students are proficient in reading, and only 24% of our students are proficient in math. This doesn't match. I'm not confident that our accountability system is holding anyone accountable. And our teachers, principals, superintendents, and other stakeholders have shared with us that the accountability system in its current form does not provide useful, actionable information. In March of this year, MSDE convened a broad-based assessment and accountability task force. Facilitated by a group of national experts from the Center of Assessment, a total of 12 task force meetings took place over 7 months. Nearly 30 stakeholders committed their time, talent, and expertise. Teachers, principals, superintendents, parents, advocates, union members, higher education representatives, and local school leaders. Their task was strengthening the connection between student growth, achievement, and school ratings. The guiding priorities for this work included measuring what is important for improving student outcomes, using accountability to drive behavior, transparency in monitoring and reporting, and achieving the Blueprint's call for all students to be college and career ready by the end of 10th grade. The task force developed a capstone report, and we are now actively working to operationalize their recommendations by planning for new assessments and revisions to our accountability systems to ensure that they more accurately reflect and support student success. Before we close and welcome questions, I want to emphasize that we remain deeply committed to realizing the promise and the vision of the Blueprint, building a world-class public education system for all of Maryland's students, and doing what it takes to get there. The stakes are high. Children's lives are depending on us doing the right thing. We understand that achieving the goals of the Blueprint requires thoughtful, deliberative implementation focused on student outcomes. We look forward to partnering with you and stakeholders across the state to ensure that every child in Maryland receives a world-class education that they deserve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to our MSDE panel. We will take questions. I did want to, I think I've told you the story, Senator Washington and I were at a conference like in 2023 on education policy, and all we heard about was this superintendent from Mississippi, Carrie Wright, and the Mississippi Miracle. We didn't know who the heck you were, and then 6 months later, you're in the current gig. So anyway, with that history, we'll start with the Vice Chair Kagan, then we'll go to Senator Washington.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Wright, Dr. Michael, thank you very much for all that you do, and thank you for being with us. And I'm looking forward to the next panel as well with my former county executive and friend, Ike Leggett. I have a million questions, but I will just do 3 to start off, and because I know my colleagues have a bunch of questions too. Dr. Wright, you talked about English language learners, which is really important in my district and increasingly around the state as well. You mentioned 3 partners, including CASA, but they sounded, 2 of them at least, and I missed the name of the first one, sounded like Spanish language, reaching out to the Latino community, especially Montgomery County, but again, around the state. We have a lot of residents who speak languages that aren't Spanish, and I just want to make sure that we are effective in reaching out to other communities and making sure that our students are getting English skills. So that's question number 1.
Yeah.
So I think I'll let you answer each of them if you'd like.
Yeah,
rather than tossing
the
them all
3
at you.
partners that we did mention, Community Well, and Maryland Latinos United, and Casa de Maryland. And we are very consciously looking to how we can provide those services for all students, not just Hispanic students. And we've hired an amazing multilingual learner coordinator for the department, who's now working with the multilingual coordinators across the state and the LEAs.
It's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that can be obviously one of the explanations for our really frustrating, a little bit depressing scores. Dr. Michael, were you going to add something
Yeah,
to
I was
that?
just going to, Community Well specifically is an all-encompassing group that's working across languages and cultures to
Right.
bring folks together. And that's kind of a combination of advocacy work and other groups that have come together. So point is well taken. It is much more than Spanish in our state. We're truly multilingual.
Yes, I mean,
yep.
we have Amharic and French and Swahili, and like, we have all the things here in Montgomery. Second question, the MSDE board. I have been approached, I'm sure my colleagues have as well, about we want to add a member who is this, that, or the other. Is the board sufficiently diverse, inclusive, and bringing expertise to help you all govern and do the jobs that we need to do? Because we do have legislation, and there are others who have reached out as well.
So, as the newcomer here, I'm going to say the answer to that question is yes. I think that the board has been the appointments to the board, the people on the board, highly professional, very dedicated to education, very dedicated to making sure that we're doing the right thing for children across the state. I think that, and Dr. Michael, knowing Pillar 1 is as big as it is, has just convened a subgroup of the child care providers and across the state, and they're going to be meeting with the board on a regular basis. I think this board is very responsive to the needs across the state. You've got administrators on the board, you've got a teacher on the board, you've got business people on the board. I mean, you've got a great group of parents, absolutely. I mean, it's just a great group of
Yeah.
people that have a very diverse perspective on education.
Thank you.
I will add the one dynamic that we hope you're aware of. It is a large group. We have a board of 14 people. And, you know, it is a large board. It is essentially the largest board in the state. And so I would just want to be really thoughtful about size when I say that in terms of school boards. And so that allows us to have a lot of voices at the table. We think the appointments office is really working hard to make sure there's geographic diversity, there's racial and ethnic diversity, there is diversity of experience. This board at this point is filled with former educators from all sorts, and so we really emphasize, and people have talked to us about the composition, working with the appointments office.
Good.
On that.
Well, Secretary Edwards and her team have done an excellent job just everywhere. My last question, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot because it's very timely today, yesterday, all that, but seeking to try to make lemonade here as to what's going on in the federal government. As there are federal employees who either are pushed out or who take this new possible option of retiring, I just would hope that we are reflecting on the opportunity to recruit those folks with all of their skills and passion for public service and inviting them to consider being teachers. If they start as substitutes, if they start as uncertified, I would love to see that we're bringing in really top-notch folks with a background in all the areas.
Well, hiring the best has certainly been a priority for me, but I can also tell you it's been something that the governor's been working with the governor's cabinet. And so we are absolutely open and looking for the very best that can be. That's how we're going to keep getting even better.
But specifically federal employees?
No,
Okay.
I'm talking about federal, because
Okay.
where it all opened was when the whole thing came out about the possibility of closing the Department of Ed, right? So lots of these discussions are taking place behind the scenes, but know that our eyes are on that.
I love that. I assumed that, but I just wanted to
Yes,
say it out
that's
loud
true.
because it seems like a great source of talent. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you. And thank you. Yes, I was excited. We heard so much about what, schools, systems in the South are doing, and it was just really exciting to see you here. I have a couple of questions. Just, I want to say that the two buckets I want to explore with you, but again, thank you for being here. One has to do with the early childhood pillar and early childhood division. As you may know, under the prior administration, the early childhood division had a lot of contractual employees. There'd been some consolidation of functions, and which in general this body had asked about a lot of vacancies. And so just wondering where you are just kind of broadly in right-sizing and reconstituting the division as a whole.
That's a good question. We have been focusing, at least since I've been here, on reducing the number of contractual positions, and DBM has actually been working with us on that to turn those into full-time positions as well. Unfortunately, we are losing our leader. Dr. Cook is leaving for personal reasons, and we're going to miss her. But we are, to your point, we are looking to replace her with someone of high quality, and we are also this also gives us a good time, Senator Washington, to really look at the organizational structure of the office, and that is something that I kind of do out of habit. When you're replacing a leader, it gives you a chance to sit down and say, is this really how we want this organized? And are we meeting the needs of our stakeholders? And how responsive are we being? And are there changes that need to be made? I think that just keeps you fresh if you're constantly making sure that you're meeting the needs of those people who we serve. And so that is something that is a priority of mine.
And please let us know if your vision and what we need to do to really make the type of early learning, child care, or transitioning this whole idea that it's not simply child care, that it's early learning, right?
I'm glad you said that, because that is something that I don't think we talk about enough. It's not just a place to send your child keep your child for the day. It's not daycare. I mean, are we taking care of children? Absolutely. But we should then be providing them with those developmentally appropriate experiences and all of the different subject areas and social emotional development as well. So I think that is one thing that we are going to be needing to focus on, I think a little bit more than we possibly have been. And so that's something that's on the top of my list. I'm glad you mentioned it.
And the Blue Plan is very silent in that proportion of it. Our initiatives around that professionalization, of this part of our educational career ladder. I'm here, I want to make sure there's time for everyone else, so that's good. The second question in this area is the cost associated with early learning / childcare, and the variability and range in that cost, and certainly that has had implications on the scholarship fund.
Yes, it has.
Has there been any consideration, of a cap of something? I mean, again, we range from, there can be 3 times as much between what it costs or what is charged among various different centers.
Sure. So the governor's budget does include some provisions that would put a cap. I want to just frame for us that we've seen a dramatic expansion, near doubling in 2 years of participation in the child care scholarship program. So we've gone from enrollment that is about 21,000 at the beginning of 2023 families to we're almost 40,000 at this point, and on track to be above 40,000 by the end of the fiscal year. So within that, and that has been, this is a federally supported program for the first 130 million. And so we are building on top of that. The governor's budget includes about just over 400 million. For next year on top, we will be in, we'll need an additional appropriation to cover overages for this year. But this program is large. So the point is, the governor's plan does include a cap in that. And there are some other policy moves that I want to just make you aware of as well. There is the new market rate study that will take effect, which means the rates will need to, like what the reimbursable rate is in each county or clusters of county that's done, that will increase. This body and the House took action to elevate during COVID the rate we reimbursed off those market rates. We'll need to revisit that. We'll need to look at that in terms of and balance the priorities of how much do we put in. So these are all decisions that are a part of it. We have said child care scholarship has been wildly successful.
Unbelievable.
And so to your point earlier, when we put child care expansion, particularly for our poorest and our working class families with the expansion of pre-K, we are truly building a 0 to 5 early learning system together that is wrapping our arms around families and young children in a way that really embraces their brain development and their socio-emotional development.
Great, thank you.
One thing, if I could just add one other thing, even though the cap is being recommended, what our envisioning.
We're talking about the cap in.
The cap and enrollment, right.
Okay, yeah.
So what we're thinking, even though there may be a cap, because without a cap, you're just going to continue to increase and increase and increase, and the money is not sustainable. So what we're envisioning is anytime children either age out or drop out, there will be a list to backfill all of those vacancies, all of those seats.
Where we would prioritize highest need families at that point.
That's correct.
But also a cap in the cost that a provider can be reimbursed or control.
Well, and that exists right now.
Yeah.
So what is the cap then?
Well, it's based on the market rate in the area, and then there's a percent on that. So right in percentile. So this is what it costs in Baltimore City. And then right now we're hitting at the 70th percentile of that market distribution in Baltimore City. So that's how that payment structure works. But the cap is specifically on the enrollment.
I just have to get a number. So the range is from, I don't know, 10,000 to 25,000 a year, 500 a day. I mean, what's the range?
We could get you that information. I just don't have that off the top of my head, but we can get that to you.
Would be in terms of cost containments and looking at providing. We need to look at how much is being charged across the system.
We'll get that information to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Carrozza, then we'll go over to the other side. Next up will be Senator Watson.
Thank you. I first want to thank the chair and Stacy for putting together this briefing. We've had this briefing in the past and early in the session. It really does inform our decision-making, so thank you for that. I have 2 questions. The first one is, I was asked to be the moderator during the MACO conference where on the blueprint and implementation during December. And the real highlight there was that the superintendents working with the boards of education and with MACO came out with 30-plus recommendations, looking at it from the standpoint, and for 24 superintendents, I guess, to agree on anything is incredible. But they took that step and said, we're 3 years into this, and they put together these thoughtful recommendations. They pointed out that they said the blueprint tends to have a one-size-fits approach that does not fit for all districts, and they base their recommendations in priority order by pillar. And this is some of the most impressive work as far as specific recommendations, and I know some of these are leading to some legislative proposals. But what I wanted to ask you at a leadership level is, have you gone through and really looked at these recommendations that are coming straight from the front lines, and have you prioritized some of those recommendations and perhaps really taking into account the reality of where we are with Blueprint and looking ahead for the future?
So the answer to that question is yes. I've met with the superintendents. We've had a discussion about this. We've gone through it item by item, and so absolutely are we aware of what they're asking, and we also know where points that we can come to agreement and points where we may differ in our opinion on it. But I think it's been a collaborative approach to the entire document, to be honest with you.
If I could add, look, teachers are our front line in the classroom. Principals are our front line on implementing implementing the blueprint. So when we're getting this feedback, we take it exceptionally seriously.
Absolutely.
We had an opportunity to meet with superintendents prior to it being published, provide feedback back and forth, and really appreciated that opportunity. And we've already gotten to working with our partners at AIB on working some of those. So one, I'm pleased to report as an example, yesterday we took action on clarifying where public schools should focus in the mixed delivery system. So that policy was adopted by both boards yesterday. So we take the recommendations exceptionally seriously, and we work, we don't agree with everything in there, and we think there are a lot that we should be, we're working on and working pieces, but we are grateful for the superintendents really pulling their voices together to provide really actionable next steps.
And I think it would be helpful for this committee if there is a prioritization, if you review this, to say either where you've taken action that doesn't require legislation or you have some agreements on their priorities. That really informs us moving forward. So that would be my request, if that you would do some type of prioritization of, because there's 30 some and where the focus should be. But I really was impressed that they actually prioritize within each pillar, and I would be looking for those priorities. My second question, I'll be brief, is that given Maryland's current budget crisis, and the fact that we know that the blueprint is not paid in the out years, have you all at a leadership level really looked at prioritizing the blueprint education plan? That it's clear that, we can't do everything that the blueprint calls for, given that we simply don't have the money. What has been the process at a leadership level to really look to see on what is doable at this point?
Well, the board chair and vice chair and I meet with the AIB leadership, so that's Chair Leggett, Vice Chair Kerwin, Executive Director Rachel Heiss. We meet every single month, and we have at least a 2 to 3 hour meeting every single month, and what we discuss is everything blueprint. And so when this is coming up, or we've had conversations about it, just like when the AIB came out and said, right now, and this was through a discussion that we had, we don't believe that collaborative time, as it currently is written, is doable, because we simply do not have the number of teachers to throw it. But that was a long discussion before we finally came up with a resolution, and both and AIB was the one that put it out, and we supported that. So I think that kind of conversation back and forth, I can honestly say from my standpoint, I think it's one of the most collaborative relationships that we have is with AIB, and we don't always agree, but we can disagree agreeably and have the conversation to solve the problems that are in front of us.
Well, that's been an improvement with that relationship. And then I'll just, just parting note that really appreciate when we hear that you're on site in these local counties. The best information we receive is from the front lines, and that's why I put so much emphasis on my questions on these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to a former member of the Prince George's Board of Education, Senator Ron Watson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Good seeing you. So I was struck and really couldn't pull my eyes off Pillar 2, 13, with the teacher qualifications and how the 22% of inexperienced teachers being directed to high poverty schools. So several years ago, well, not even several, a couple years ago, we recognized there was a teacher shortage. And I recall making the decision that the school systems and the state school system was going to use a lot of conditional certification to get teachers in the pipeline and then ultimately get them qualified or certified to properly be in front of our children. And the names I heard was Teach for America, Teachers for Tomorrow, I Teach Learn, all of these different programs that I know when I was on the school board, we wanted to make sure we had this pipeline. And it looks like, and then last year, I think it was called the Maryland Educator Shortage Reduction Act that I think passed out of this body with the goal of trying to solve that problem. And so we've known this problem exists for a long, long time. Is it just a money problem, or is it that the teaching career path is just not profitable enough for the average person to go through it and live here in the state of Maryland? We know the issues, and we keep talking about it year after year after year after year. I've seen no change. And I'm very disturbed that in our worst performing schools of the highest poverty, we've had the most inexpensive teachers. Now, when I was on the school board, we took an opportunity to say the money follows the child. We put extra money in the pocket of teachers who went into hard to serve schools. We've tried to throw everything at this thing. And now we're in a position where we're challenged on funding the blueprint in the out years. And so what I want to know from you is this purely a money issue, or is there a strategy that all school boards in the state have not put in their toolkit yet that's going to, stem this tide?
Well, I think it's multifaceted. I don't think there's one reason that you could pin on this, to be honest. This is happening nationally. It's not just happening in Maryland. The number of people deciding to go into our traditional teacher prep programs is not where it used to be, and that's across the nation. So I think all states are being faced with how do we provide adequate, instruction in our classrooms, and you've got people that are deciding to change careers and they become the conditionally certified teachers. You've got teachers and they want to become teachers. I think that's the reason that the conditionally certified teachers really stepped up. You've got a lot of these people coming from the communities in which they live. This is probably one of the most diverse groups of people that you'd ever want to have in terms of our teaching staff. I think it's going to take a number of things. We've already reached out to a couple of universities to ask how can we partner with them with a pure focus on the conditionally certified teachers. Like, what would that look like if we partnered with the university and then we're able to get these conditionally certified teachers certified? Judge, did you want to say something?
And I'll just add, we have some promising evidence that the shortage is subsiding, right? So we've seen the number of vacancies go down this year. So we are moving in the right direction, but we have this huge ballooning problem of conditionally licensed teachers that is new since you adopted the blueprint. It is not a new issue in Prince George's County and Baltimore City. What is new is that it's statewide. And the blueprint as it is currently structured is not built for conditionally certified teachers. There are other policy initiatives in place, And what we're really focused on is we need to bring some new strategies to the table, new partners to the table. We adopted new regulations about 9 months ago that allow for an on-the-job experience to receive training where we're credentialing experience. These are all the policy levers, but the point is we need to retain and upskill the teachers we have that are serving in schools now. And the last thing I'd say is it's taking some time, but the conditions are getting to the place where Maryland's going to be one of the best places to teach in the country. You have a starting salary of $60,000. You're going to have a career ladder with National Board. You've got an ecosystem and a political climate that is generally open to teachers really working with students. You all have been gracious in delegating standards to the State Board of Education and leaving that work to educators. And that environment is very attractive for teachers. So we think with some of the policy initiatives that are being discussed that we think there's a lot of promise about when we look in the next 5 years.
So let me ask my last
pipeline.
two questions because I don't want to hold everybody up. So I did take an opportunity while you were speaking to go to the Maryland report card, right? One of our best performing schools is 57, that's Roosevelt. And interestingly enough, I looked at 15 schools and the worst one was the school I graduated from, Central High School, with a score of 33.4. Is that an issue of local policy? Or is that an issue of statewide policy? Because it seems like in each jurisdiction, we have some superstar teachers. Are we not putting them where they need to be? You know, should the focus be more on the locals? You know, I need you to tell me what I can do to help solve this issue, because the only subpopulation I've seen that has made strides in closing the achievement gap 18 years ago when I was on the school board are English language learners. That's it. Because it's a low-hanging fruit. We can all say, if you're going to learn in our school system, you got to learn the language. That's an easy one to go after. The other ones are more nuanced, and I give you credit for trying to go after, you know, some of these other issues that impact our kids' ability to learn. But I need to know, do we as Prince Georgians, me and my colleagues over here, need to look more in depth into what's going on in Prince George's County School Board? Or can I trust that if the blueprint is fully funded, based on what you have with the pillars, it's going to funnel down to see the results that I want to see?
Yeah. So I want to state very clearly, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of this is about resource allocation.
Okay.
And the provisions you have in 5234 around minimum school funding that are beginning to be layered in are critical provisions to ensuring that there is equitable distribution of funds that follows students to their schools.
Okay.
That part of the blueprint is just beginning to layer in. Holding the line on 5234 and the 75% rule is critical to ensuring that we have the resources in place so that the money actually follows the student to their school. That is going to require that we adequately staff, that we look at our teachers that cost the most, our national board certified teachers, our more experienced teachers. Superintendents are going to have to make some decisions about how to prioritize the allocation of our greatest resource, our people in our schools, as we approach that. So I would add that provision of the blueprint is so critical to the construct that you just lifted, and that is just beginning to layer in. Turn to Dr. Wright on another policy set.
One other thing that, and you've landed on something that's kind of bothering me too, and I think that's when I would go back to the report card and how we are holding schools accountable for student learning. The task force really spent the better part of 7 or 8 months looking into this very issue. And the way that our accountability system is currently structured, it's really not giving schools enough credit, if you will, for growing children. And let me just give you a very simple explanation. If you, we've got a 4-level system, advanced, proficient, et cetera. And if I take a child, and there's a lot of schools that have a lot of those children that are at the bottom, you can't have a proficiency rate this low and not. And I take a child from the bottom of level 1 to the top of level 1, and they don't go into level 2, that school's not going to get the kind of credit it deserves. That takes a lot to get a kid up, much less over. And so we need to restructure the accountability system so that schools are really focusing where are these children, who are these children, what interventions are they getting, and know them by name. So that if we're looking at, in my prior experience, we had a section called growth of the bottom 25%. Well, you had to know who that was. Even if you were a top-performing school, you still had a bottom 25%. And so what does that look like? And then how do we structure an accountability model that really draws eyes to the children that need that kind of growth? That doesn't prohibit the kids that are excelling from continuing, because you give them even more points if you keep them at advanced, is the methodology I would use. But when you're growing children, our model does not really account for that. And so that's one of the reasons that we're looking to restructure the model, to really make it more robust and make it more transparent, and make it to where districts are really getting the credit that they need for growth.
Real quickly, last question. There's been rumors that at the federal level, they may want to close up shop with the Department of Education. My take on that was, what would be the impact rolling down here for us at the state? Will we still get Title IX, Title X, or would we basically, in effect, just lose a common standard across the nation? And the reason I bring that up is because when I served as vice chair of the school board, my chair was Regina McCarter-Jacobs, who's the CEO now of National School Boards Association. So this is a conversation that they're talking about, just in case this happens at the federal level. How could they work with the LEAs to create a standard so we still have a tangible way to measure progress and achievement consistently across the country? You have any comments on that?
You're spot on, because that my biggest fear is what you mentioned first, is around the monies and cutting the funds back. You know, that's already been out there, you know, in the ether about that could be coming. But for me, accountability is very, very important. You know, I hold myself accountable. The board holds me accountable. And I think that we need to be ensuring that everybody needs to be accountable for student outcomes. And I think that's what an accountability model would do for you. And my fear is, if we do not keep a high standard, and we do not expect that high standard all across our state, our children will suffer because of that. And so I think you have hit on two very key issues, which is the funding and the accountability for student outcomes.
Thank you for coming out today. I appreciate you.
Okay. Hey, guys, because we have a few more panels on this same subject, so what we'll do is, no, it's all good. We're going to go Senator Gallion, Senator Simonaire, Senator Washington, and then Senator Hester, you'll have the last word, because we still have more panels on the topic, and we have bill hearings. So I just want to, so we're going to start with you, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two brief questions. The first, we've talked about some funding details, and I have a question about per pupil funding. That was mentioned by my colleague earlier a little bit. Where are we as far as per pupil funding compared, you know, like now, as we were compared to, like, say, 5 years ago when we were first talking about the blueprint?
Where are we in terms of?
Per pupil funding, the amount.
So the per pupil funding continues to moderately increase. So it has been since the adoption of the blueprint, and the people behind me, particularly Ms. Heiss, can speak to this much more specifically, but have been on an increase that both accommodates some of the programmatic elements related to the blueprint, but primarily to keep up with inflation. The biggest change that I think is really important that's coming in the blueprint as it relates is the requirement that money follows the child to the school where they're at. So the base is making progress. There is inflationary pieces that have been built in. I think there are some questions about, particularly during the pandemic when we saw significant inflation, whether we've kept up with that. I think that's something to examine more closely. But the biggest change from pre-blueprint that I just want to elevate for you is this notion that we're requiring not only foundation money, but comp ed and other elements to actually follow to the school where those students attend.
And then one other quick one. I was reading, I didn't get to read all of it, but there's a Baltimore Sun article today talking about the issue of chronic absenteeism.
Yes, sir.
Which, I mean, it's like anything. It's hard to accomplish much if you don't show up. So can you just kind of give us a brief talk on, you know, possible solutions for that, ideas, or what we can do to make that better.
Yeah, we have just recently partnered with the national organization called Attendance Works. This is a national group that works with states on this very issue of chronic absenteeism. We have set a goal, it's an aligned metric with the AIB to cut chronic absenteeism in half over the next 2 years. And so we have formed this group. Obviously, Hetty Chang with her group from Attendance Works is leading this work, but our team is on it, and we're adding additional people to form a small task force, if you will, to really be thinking about what do best practices look like, who across the United States is doing a really good job of this, and I'll tell you, Connecticut is really knocking it out of the park, and so we've been in contact with them to find out what structures did they put in place, how were they monitoring it, what kind of technology did they use in terms of gathering the data, and so those are things that we've got to look at, because right now Maryland is only collecting data 3 times a year on attendance from our districts. And in order to really make a difference in this, you're going to have to collect attendance on a regular basis from the districts. So that's part of what, but what would that mean in terms of changing the back end, if you will, on getting that done? But all that is up on the table for discussion.
I just want to zoom in here on this. Look, Dr. Wright is putting all of the systems and supports in place to do this at a state level. Just like with teaching a child to read, getting a kid to school, this is family by family work. The schools that are doing this the best, they know which children are chronically absent, they have relationships with those families, and we have a lot of schools that are really moving this work. And we're getting to a place where the data is really stubborn in some schools, and part of what we need to have a larger conversation around, and we're gonna lean on you all in your communities, is a resetting of norms about coming to school and being in place. And so as we are in this session and moving into next school year, we're gonna need your help, because coming out of the pandemic, we need to reset the expectation in our communities that being in school is the best place for children to be when school is open. And so I just wanna say we got all the technical and adaptive work, but at the end of the day, this is about showing up, and we are gonna need your help.
And let me just add, because one thing that people don't realize, chronic absenteeism includes excused absences. So I just need to lift that up. It's not just if I've got the doctor's note, therefore I'm excused. Well, you weren't in school. So that counts. I'm going on a college visit. Well, you weren't in school. That counts. So it's all absences get counted into chronic absenteeism. And I think that's a really important thing to think about, too.
Okay, let's go to Senator Simon Ayer. Next.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, and thank you for your service. I know you're relatively new here, so you've got it all. So my questions are going forward. I'm an engineer by trade, and I have a couple kids, and none of them followed me in the engineering. But my last one just announced she wants to be an elementary school teacher.
How do you define a couple?
Less than 70. But my youngest just said she wanted to be an elementary school teacher,
Aw,
so she's
good.
studying for that. So,
Good.
but being an engineer, I'm very results oriented. And I look at the presentation and I see the pillars, and to me, they're not the end goal. They're just the mechanism to get to the end goal as far as academic achievement. And I started looking at the charts that are in here and listening to you about the proficiency. And unless I'm misinterpreting it, I mean, our ranking and the selective ones that you put in here for the other charts, we're below 2013 marks. And as far as
Yes,
ranking
that is correct.
and
If you're looking at the
performance.
NAEP data, that is correct. In 2013, Maryland was number 2 in the nation for 4th grade reading.
Right, and so, I mean, the whole conversation is have a world-class education.
Correct.
I mean, United States is not at the top of the list of education, so we're not even, even if we got to be number 1 there, we're not like in the top of the world as far as education. So my concern is, how are we going to get there? Seeing the trend here, how will we even get back to 2013's rates, and then from there, get to a world-class education? The numbers don't line up with the optimism, so help me get
Well,
there.
I guess because I've, kind of been there, done that, to be honest with you. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes day in and day out. This is not an overnight fix. Chair Feldman mentioned, Mississippi Miracle, and I teased him one time. I said, this isn't a miracle. This is a marathon. I mean, this is getting the right structures in place, the right strategy in place, the evidence-based practices in place, supporting our teachers and leaders and our families, and sticking with it. This isn't about coming up with a plan for this year and then a different plan for next year, and it is about tracking data. We have got to be keeping our eyes on the ball where our data are concerned. And it stunned me, to be honest, to see 10 years ago where we were versus where we are now. I was a principal at the time in Maryland. Most of my career was in Maryland. So that was a bit heartbreaking. But we can get back there, but we can't get back there in a year. I mean, I think that's the reality of it, but that doesn't mean we don't keep doubling down on those kids that need it the most, providing
agree with
access
that.
and opportunity
It's
for
just-
all kids.
I've been here long enough. I think I'm the longest serving with Senator Rosenpep now, believe it or not, in the Senate. And I went through the Thornton Bridge to Excellence, I think they called it, and we were going to have a world-class education there. And we spent a lot of money, and people bought into it. And then the Kerwin Commission came back and said basically it was a failure because you were looking, I think, at inputs instead of outputs or something. So Kerwin's going to fix that. So just the quick question is, you know, if you come back and brief us next year, the year after that, I mean, how long do you anticipate just to get back to 2013 with our current trend?
This is I mean, it's a great question. Let me say at a very high level.
That's what I want, high level.
It is during the Thornton years that Maryland was on a trajectory to dramatically improve public education. If you go and look on our NAEP, so you see 2013, if you go to 11, and you go back to 2000, we saw some of the greatest gains in the country and got to a really strong level. Those resources were really effective. It is when we hit the financial crisis in 2008 and we pulled out the inflationary factor and the other pieces because we had to, but then didn't immediately reinvest when we had the opportunity, that we started to see the lag.
Yeah, I think
but
that's debatable. I mean, you're saying it was just basically money.
Well,
I
no,
don't think that's
I'm
what
hitting
it
the
was.
second point. If you give me a second. It's money and strategy.
Right.
So the people behind me and Dr. Kerwin, they traveled the world, to your point, and said, what are the other places doing? They got the strategies. They brought them back. They brought them to the table. You've got a plan. We then, the state board, we went out and got the superintendent in this country that had produced the biggest gains in any state in the history of NAEP.
And I voted for
She's
it.
here. And the results you're seeing in fourth grade in literacy and mathematics, that's what year-over-year gains look like on NAEP if you're on that trajectory. So the expectation is to continue to see the types of gains in the 2 years from now that we're seeing in fourth grade reading and math. And we need to start seeing them in eighth grade. And we're putting in places the pieces around the blueprint, the instructional system. You know, when people say, well, you're doing literacy policy and math policy, that's not the blueprint. No, we're building the instructional system that Dr. Kerwin suggested we built. So those are the things we're doing. We are on track to make progress. Not going to happen overnight. But when we come back, you know, we expect to see, and you allow us to stay on track and keep the investments in place, we're gonna work this strategy to make sure we build that world-class education system.
I'm hoping for you.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you, and thank you both for that mini history lesson, and that there is a little bit of Reconstructionist history, because we keep, like, every 20 years or so coming up with a new plan, and then we hit a snag financially, and the money is withdrawn. I mean, that's there. I was here in 2012 when we kind of rolled back that, and so stability to me and commitment, not only of the strategy, but the resources to implement the strategy is really key. So I appreciate that point. And again, just, you know, going back to Bradford, Thornton, I even read that there were some reforms in the 80s so we've been doing this for about 40 years, and we keep getting into it for a couple of years, and every single time we pull out. So just looking forward to continuing it. But my question has to do with the certifications, and I know that if you would provide information back and thinking about those 6,000 that are conditionally certified, I'd like to know, so part of what everyone needs to have, I guess it's now the ED TPA test, and then also the national exam. That's in order to be certified, a certified teacher in Maryland, you have to pass that exam. Is that correct or no?
So last year you helped us create some alternative pathways on that. So that is the standard. But the portfolio piece, we did put provisions in, and this committee helped us do that, that allow for some alternative measures around that, particularly as it pertains to induction. So I want to be clear, we have that, but we've addressed it, and we have, is Ms. Meadows here?
Well, I'm sorry, I should just ask the question.
Okay.
The question is, how many are not certified due to not passing the exam? How many are, dividing up between the alternative pathway?
None.
And, just focusing on that group, because I'm on the website about, becoming a teacher in Maryland and the licensure pathway, and the alternatives still seem to land at passing a national standardized test, and we still talk about national board certification, and I believe that is the result of an examination made by ETS and another one by Pearson.
Here comes the expert.
Okay, tell us, before you say a word, tell us who you are.
Kelly Meadows, Assistant State Superintendent for the Division of Educator Effectiveness at the department. So thank you for the question. So the EdTPA is currently, is about to be the only nationally recognized portfolio-based assessment on the market. So that's why we commonly refer to it just as the EdTPA. It goes into effect as a requirement for all teachers graduating from Maryland programs July 1st of this year. So to answer your question, I don't anticipate that anybody is being prevented from licensure at this point due to that assessment, because we have not established a true cut score yet. At this point in time, you take it, and as long as you participate, you're
How
good.
about the praxis?
The praxis assessment is a completely different battery. So those are subject assessments, and they have been in place for decades.
I understand. I just want to, I'm just trying to problem solve. And so just the question is how many trying to identify what are the barriers. And just so that you know, the state is going through this in social work, right? And identifying the barriers. Some have to do with the test. Some have to do with an uncompensated required 3,000 hours to work. Like there are many barriers to and so I'm asking about if we can and we could help you do this. Of those 6,000, what's the thing that's keeping them from being certified? And then we can work on that. So that's what I'm interested in.
Sure. So I think that there are several different barriers. I think one of the barriers, of course, assessments are going to be a barrier for effective people. I think a bigger barrier for our conditionally licensed teachers is the lack of flexible programs that they have access to get the preparation done while they're working full-time jobs and being parents and being community members. So we work very hard with our educator preparation programs or institutions of higher education to explore what other pathways to licensure can we put in place so that they are flexible, that they're cost effective. In some cases, they're done at the local level. As Dr. Michael stated, we've just established a new licensure pathway that allows our local school systems to kind of take that primary role in preparing that individual. So I think that, this is a different time. We have to think of different ways in which we prepare our teachers, because we're never going to see the numbers that we need to see in our traditional preparation programs to staff Maryland schools.
Yeah, agreed. But,
So thank you for your willingness to help us.
But just for now, today, the 6,000, all the pathways, there is a standardized exam. There are, as you say, uncompensated time that has to be spent. Would like an opportunity to identify those. And if there is a sector where it is very simple, maybe it's the test. Maybe we really support them being able to pass the test.
Right.
I don't know, maybe that gets us 1,000 certified. I don't know, but I do think we could start now.
Absolutely.
Figuring out what it is they need and doubling down and focus on getting those people into the classroom.
I will tell you the cost of the assessments is a barrier.
Yes, I do know that.
Okay. Senator Hester.
Thank you. And I know that we're short on time, so I'll ask my 3 questions and ask you to be brief and maybe follow up offline if you need to. The first question was the whole accountability issue piqued my interest, and I'm wondering if there is legislation being proposed, or if you are working on something that addresses the accountability changes you would like to see. That's my first question. My
So,
second,
you wanna-
yeah, go ahead.
So there is one, it is not up for legislation, but we will flag, this body has capped, which is pretty unusual across the country, the percent of the Maryland report card that can actually be academic measures. So we are capped at 65% in terms of the percent of our Maryland report card that can be there. So that was put in place 6 or 7 years ago. We will at some point want to revisit that because we really want to ensure
Be other indicators.
that growth is a really large part of this. And so just putting that's one thing we'll want to revisit in the future as we look to reform the report card.
So you said there's one thing. Where is the list of these accountability changes you want to see?
So there's two things. Number one, if you go on the website, you will see under the Maryland Report Card, you will see all the various components that add up. I think somebody was talking about 33 points or 75, whatever the points are. That's on the website. So you will see that comprises your accountability system. That means every school gets rated based and gets points in each of those areas. The statute has capped the number of percentages that we can use for academic reasons
Yeah, no,
at
I
60.
understand this part. I was curious, like, it sounds like you've got a report.
We
that
do.
outlines,
It should be on our
There's
website.
really one legislative fix. The rest of it is dealt with administratively at the department.
Okay,
But she's talking about the report. The
No, I
report-
want to know, like, if you want 10 things to change about
We
accountability.
want one thing changed.
You just want the,
Yes. But we need your help on one thing.
I know, but I want to know what are the 10 things. If I'm doing one and you're doing 9, what are the 9?
Oh, we'll give you the
We'll
report.
give you the report.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's easy enough.
That was my
Yeah,
first question.
sorry.
My second question was, we had a great dialogue over the summer around updating our computer science standards, which haven't been changed since 2018. Could you just briefly share with the committee your timeline and your plans for working on that?
Let me get back to you on that.
Okay, that's fine. If you could provide the committee with that information, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
And then my third question is just as we face, as you and I have talked about with artificial intelligence,
Yes.
we know it can help teachers teach more efficiently. We know it can help kids learn better. There's some great results coming out of Baltimore County where they're using an AI model and it's having a 26% growth rate in kids reading. So what does MSDE need in order to really help all of our locals maximize the, the use of AI? Is it money? Is it people? Is it like?
Could be a little bit of both, and also ideas. I don't think that everybody has really been leaning into AI. I think that's one of the reasons that we've been serving on, having people serve on various kinds of task forces. I think you were serving on SREB's task force around AI. And so I think what we're trying to do is compile best practices to make sure that the districts know what's possible out there with AI. That would be my first answer to you. And we don't have inside the department, AI is kind of spread over content areas. There's not like a team. I know some states have a team that are just focused on AI. We simply do not have enough positions to have an AI team. So we've had to kind of embed AI across subject areas.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to the both of you for excellent presentation. We're going to next go to the next panel, which is our Accountability and Implementation Board. And we've got, as was referenced earlier, my former county executive, Ike Leggett, the chair of that board, and Rachel Heiss, executive director. Welcome. Ike, do you want to take the lead here?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I know that you're pressed for time, and we're not going to go through all of the bevy of slides that we have. We're going to go through the direct questions and hit on a few highlights in order to try to save some time. First of all, let me thank Dr. Wright and the entire staff at MSDU. We have an excellent working relationship. And we have worked together, I think, diligently over the last 18 months or so. And I think you're now beginning to see the progress of that work. Let me also thank Ms. Heiss to my right and Ms. Costello in terms of her performance. We have achieved a great deal in a relatively short period of time. But I want to go just for 1 second to third chart that we have.
Hey, Ike, could you just bring the mic a little close?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Wait, hold on a second. Let's wait till we've got our crack whip technical advisor, Senator Kagan's going to solve our problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
There you go.
Let me start again by saying I'm going to reduce the amount of time considerably here, given the schedule for today. We've had a great working relationship with Dr. Wright and the entire team at MSDE. She really has done a stellar job for us, and we're fortunate to have some of her talent to work with us to help us implement this very ambitious plan. To my right, as you may know, this is Rachel Heiss, the Executive Director. I just want to pinpoint a couple of highlights, and this is what I will do. I will talk a little bit about generalized issues and challenges, look at where we're headed from here, talk about one or two particular challenges we have, and then reserve the bulk of the time for questions and answers. But two over highlighted challenges I want to talk to goes to page 3 or chart 3, called Blueprint Implementation. So you fully understand our role, and sometimes that is lost in a lot of discussion around the state and here. The AIB's role is to coordinate implementation of the blueprint with fidelity. That is, we are here to implement the plan. We're not here making policy as it relates to and enhancing and working carefully within the school system itself. That is the job of MSDE. There's no conflict about our roles. There are no challenges about that. We are very clear. As you heard them say, we meet regularly and we work together in a way to serve this state. We are at a point that I mentioned to you a couple of years ago, and I want to reemphasize this point again. It is a description that I gave of the person who wants to swim the English Channel. This 26-mile swim. And it starts off from France after training for a number of years, going through a considerable amount of preparation, knowing that there is a huge challenge before it. Prepared to swim, coaches, trainers, all prepared to work. The person starts off and he swims of the 26 miles, 13 miles. And naysayers look at him and said, well, you know, you really can't make it. There are too many challenges for you. The cost is too high. You can't swim, the water is too rough. You can't make it because there are some other challenges that are ahead for you. And suggest to the swimmer that they return and swim back to France. And they immediately turn around and they swim back. They never gets across. In essence, they've swam 26 miles but never got across. That's the point that you're at now with this blueprint. Having made a huge investment, you're confronted with a financial challenge. You question why some of the challenges, people saying, we really can't make it. Let's slow down considerably. Let's make major legislative changes. Let's do this, that, and the other. And you do not get across. You've worked too hard. You've gone too far. In my comments to you, as I said to you last year, that if you stay with this plan, you're going to make considerable progress. And look at what Dr. Wright told us just a few moments ago. We are making that progress. Do not toss it in and turn around and swim back. There are questions that are out there that needs to be answered. And we're going to answer them, but we are here to let you know that we plan to implement this plan with fidelity. If there are evidence-based issues that we need to go back to change, I will be the first to say to you, let's change it. We have worked with Sam, we've met with them, we've worked with a number of people throughout this entire state. And at every level, when we find that we can make adjustments or changes, we've done so. If there's a need to come before you and make a legislative change, we will do so. I recognize that this is a complex plan. The plan was developed prior to the pandemic. There are challenges associated with it. It is costly, and no one is going to get this right, and therefore there needs to be adjustments occasionally. But we can't take this literally to say, if we take the position that Sam has taken, that is, the very thoughtful piece that they provided, and we've worked with them, and we've made suggestions, and we're still working with them. But if I was in their position, in my former role as a county executive, or as a council member on education, or serving directly with boards of education, I probably would say some of the same things that they're saying. But that's not going to get you across this river. It's not going to get you there. If you look at what is stated in there, if you take it literally, it would mean they're going to spend more time to do this, far more money to do it than you're probably prepared to invest at this point in time. And you're going to do it on a schedule and a time and a way that would not get you across. With all due respect to what they've asked, you cannot accept that literally. There are some things in there that make sense. If I was them, I would probably make the same argument. But that argument is not one that will have you implement this plan if you take it literally. There are too many things in there that suggest delay, too many things that are in there that suggest go back and restudy and reevaluate this. You're not at that point. You have to get across this river. And you need to do it with fidelity. Now, having said that, I want to go to challenges that we see. There is a teacher shortage. There are changes, I think Senator Watson talked about some of the challenges in his comment about what we need to do in order to overcome one. And I'm going to turn to Ms. Heiss to talk just a little bit about collaborative time and our suggestions and changes, because here is an evidence-based issue that we recognize that we're saying we need to adjust and change. And you can understand the implications of that. But it is something that the AIB, working with MSDE, recognize and looking at the information from which we've come forth to say, this is something that needs to change. Ms. Rice?
Sure. So I just wanted to start by explaining, making sure we all have the same understanding of what this collaborative time term means. So across the country, teachers typically teach 80% of their time, and they have 20% of their time for individual planning time, primarily usually in their classroom alone, working on lesson plans, grading, things like that. When the Kerwin Commission looked at top performing systems, they found that those top performing systems, one of the things they have in common is that teachers actually have less time where they're literally standing up in front of the classroom and teaching the entire classroom, which is that 80% of time. They do that more like 60% of the time. And they have additional time during their day where they actually work collaboratively with their peers, both to develop and design lesson plans and interventions for students who need additional supports, to actually provide those additional supports to students in one-on-one and small groups. And so that is what this non-teaching time or collaborative time is intended to be. And the commission recommended moving towards this for Maryland, both because it's shown to improve student outcomes, and it also as a recruitment and retention measure, because these are some of the things, and you all in your questions were talking about, how do we improve the teacher pipeline? How do we attract more teachers into our schools? And collaborative time, this additional time for them to essentially be professionals, is, we think, part of that, as well as the $60,000 starting salary that is part of the blueprint, and other pieces that will hopefully make Maryland a place that teachers want to come to and be teachers. But as Chair Leckett pointed out, when we looked at the numbers, and MSD did excellent job in laying all of that data out for you, we don't have enough fully certified or licensed teachers today to be able to implement collaborative time, because at least the way that the commission envisioned collaborative time, it required more teachers. If teachers are going to be in front of the classroom less, we need another teacher who will be in front of that classroom, and we want them to be, a great teacher. And so the funding estimates in the blueprint are based on needing to hire an additional 12 to 15,000 teachers, and not all at once. It's phased in over 8 years. But again, when you look at the data and you see that we have, 10% of our teachers in our classrooms now are not fully licensed, that is why the AIB, when it moved ahead and at its meeting earlier this month, adopted this motion. And it really just acknowledged that with the shortage of fully licensed teachers, it is not feasible in the near term to implement collaborative time on this 8-year timeline that is in the law today. And the board also, when they discussed this motion, they also discussed the need to take additional steps, identify additional strategies to increase the teacher pipeline so that we are in a position to be able to implement collaborative time, because it is a critical piece of the blueprint.
Let me just add also to that this is a real challenge, and it's not likely in the foreseeable future to be changed. And here's why. All of the strategies that people have talked about of things we need to do are all on the table. If you have any idea of how we can increase the supply and quality of teachers, we want to hear them, and we're prepared to implement. But if we implement everything, which I think we're trying to do successfully, it is not likely to make a huge dent in the very near future about those numbers. Although we've improved the number of people in the pipeline, it's still not enough. We have 1,600 vacancies today. We have 6,000 conditionally certified teachers. You have to worry about the retention for which we lose teachers that we currently have. And we're talking about hiring 12 to 15,000 in the foreseeable future. The math does not work. Now, I want to make sure that we are not suggesting that you X out all of the resources in the category that were designed for collaborative time, because there are some ancillary potential negative effects of what happens once you remove that. How do we deal with those things? And our suggestion is that we utilize some of that to address some of the other challenges that are impacted by any kind of reduction or delay in collaborative time. And that's part of what I think should be any legislative effort going forward. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to stop because I think we want to, let me add one other thing, and I think Dr. Wright mentioned this as well. And I hear this constantly from legislators, and I hear this from parents who are talking consistently about their school and the Maryland report card. It's an item that I think has some level of merit and support. And we've gotten caught up with that over the number of years. And in my former role, I used to brag about the fact that we were in the top 10. I used to brag about the fact that we had so many schools in Montgomery County that did very well in the report card. But as she's indicated, there's a disconnect here, because our students are now performing or had been performing at 40 and 43rd in math and reading. Yet we have all of these, quote, high-performing schools. That's inconsistent. And it reminds me of my neighbor who had a son who played softball, baseball. And he had me go out to look at one of the games that we were playing. They were in the playoff. And his kids sat on the bench the entire time. The team lost. At the end of the game, everybody got a trophy. Not only did his team get a trophy for losing, the winning team got one, and everybody else that was in the playoff got a trophy. They call it a participation trophy. We don't want the Mellon report card to end up being a participation trophy. There needs to be a connection between the performance and those numbers in that report card. Otherwise, we're heading to a participation report card. That's not what we want. Okay, with that, I'll stop.
Okay, we've got questions here for our two witnesses, Chair Leggett, Ms. Heiss, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for your update. So, Mr. Chair, you mentioned about swimming across the channel, and you're halfway across, and you don't want to go back because you would have been better off to spend that effort getting all the way across. I think at this point, maybe we're looking at, we need to just change the way we're swimming, maybe switch to a backstroke or something to get the rest of the way across. And
Yep, I agree.
I mean, we had our fiscal briefing in here yesterday that showed where we're headed, and it's a tough path ahead. I mean, in that thing, we learned that funding implementation of the blueprint for the Maryland's future remains a predominant out-of-year budget challenge, accounting for 3/4 of the structural shortfall forecast for FY30. So that is a major concern, is how we get the rest of the way and do it where we don't break the bank, so to speak. But to follow up on your on the 60/40, 80/20 time where the teachers spend instructing, you mentioned that you have this on January 10th. You showed the motion that you passed that would change that from FY26 to 33. I'm assuming that means you're gonna push that back, and so you're gonna hold off on going to 60/40. You're gonna stay at 80/20 for how long? So when would now you expect to make the switch from 80/20 to 60/40?
Thank you for your question, and that's a question I think that we still are grappling with, but at least when we first looked at this, my view was that it would be a 2-year delay. But having looked now carefully at the information provided and going through the information that we recently received from MSDE, I think it is more likely that we're talking probably close to 4 years at a minimum in terms of that time frame.
So the neighborhood of like FY30 is when it would?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
If I could just add, part of what the AIB and MSD have discussed is the real need to do pilot programs so that we don't completely not do collaborative time. We want to give LEAs the opportunity to pilot different ways to implement collaborative time that may not require so many additional teachers. So it may be possible, to your point about switching our stroke, that we can actually accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with less funding.
And a good example of that would be the current plan requires an actual additional teacher on the numbers that we've just described. And it has been suggested that it may be cheaper if you model this out of a pilot, that in terms of negotiations, you can potentially extend the current teacher's school day for a period of time, pay additional sums for that. That would be cheaper than literally hiring another teacher to come in to fill that gap in terms of time, because all of the other benefits that go with a digital teacher versus simply paying someone more to extend their teaching day and so forth. So there are other ways which you may be able to reduce that number of people that you have to actually hire. So we're looking at a delay, but also what we can do in the interim to, as Ms. Heiss indicated, to potentially reduce the need not to have the 12 to 15,000, but maybe a smaller number.
Okay, let's go to Senator Hester and then to Senator Carozza.
Thank you. It's good to see you both again. Thank you for your service to the state. I had 3 questions for you also. First of all, one of the most common complaints that I hear in the county is the increased classroom sizes. And I'm wondering, if there's if that's an unintended consequence of the blueprint, or if you have any comments on that. Secondly, I've heard that there's some confusion between like the youth apprenticeship policy
and the apprenticeship policy from DOL and the CTE committee, and if you guys are working through that. And then last but not least, it's my understanding that probably the Kerwin Commission finished before the kind of massive explosion in artificial intelligence. And, what
Say it again?
AI, before the explosion of, commonly available AI.
Okay.
And I've heard, the quote, I can't remember who said it now, but, AI is not going to take your job, but the person who uses AI will take your job. And so I'm just kind of curious if in the CTE component, there's any, effort through that component of the blueprint to really make sure that our kids are AI literate by the time that they go into, out into the world and get that first job.
Well, I think both of those questions are of great concern, and we want to make sure that we have kids who are prepared for the future, and that includes what accommodation we're going to make to align them with jobs that take into consideration the technology not only now but for the future as well. A reliance upon that would have to be closely monitored with the employment sector to make sure that we're doing things that they actually need and want in order to place kids in the jobs that they actually need. So I can't answer that question precisely, but I do believe that if we're going to rely upon the private sector to help us in order to make the determination what type of training they need and the AI jobs that we may be looking at for the foreseeable future. The first question that you raised, I wasn't sure about that. Let me go back again.
Class size.
Oh, the class size. Oh, you've heard that a lot. That has been stated a lot, and I think that there are probably in some places some pressures as it relates to class size. And we've heard those complaints. And I thought you were going to say the one that comes most often to us, all of a sudden kids can't participate in the band. But class size is one of those that comes as a result as well. Part of that also results to local funding. And to be honest with you, this plan, as you developed it here, was a plan that requires both state and local participation. And so there needs to be an acknowledgement that there needs to be greater participation at the local level as well in order to enhance that. And that's where the challenge is. That's not a result of the superintendents or the principals. That's a result of elected officials making other decisions about how they should provide the resources in order to respond to an educational challenge. The challenge is we have a school system statewide that's performing at 40 and 43%. It's unacceptable. And we cannot go back to business as usual and assume that we can get through this without having to pay some additional costs, both at the state as well as the local level.
And then on your third question about apprenticeships, the CTE committee adopted an apprenticeship policy that they brought to the AIB to review and approve. And it really tries to lay out an approach where the youth apprenticeship program, which is something that started before, while the Kerwin Commission, I think, was meeting, and incorporate those programs into a more long-term apprenticeship policy that is really focused on those registered apprenticeships that the Department of Labor, is for young adults. And so the policy is really trying to transition from the youth apprenticeship policy to a high school level of a registered apprenticeship policy. We're kind of like many things in the blueprint, we're in that transition phase. And so I think that is causing some of the confusion around, we have these youth, districts have youth apprenticeship programs that they've been implementing that in some cases need to shift or change in order to be recognized under the new apprenticeship policy. So I think there's just going to be some growing pains. Happy to, if there are specific issues or questions, happy to try to follow up and cut through the confusion. Okay.
Okay, Senator Carrozza.
Chair, I just wanted to first thank you, Chair Leggett and Director Hayes for being here. But I wanted just to clarify the earlier statements about the superintendent's recommendations, and I believe how they should be viewed by us as policymakers, because in their statement with these recommendations, they actually say the blueprint's goals are achievable, but the implementation needs to be streamlined and realistic. So I look at that as, and especially I always relate back to my own 3 counties superintendents, that they are in the best position to know of the 5 pillars, what is workable and achievable and needed in their own county system. So I guess, from AIB, more of a recognition of that. And 2, we talk about this 80-20, 60-40, and the fact that we're, taking the pause on the 60-40. I have questions on if most other states are at 80-20, and most of those states are ahead of Maryland in academic performance, is that really this, is it really, I'm not sure why we would do a whole-scale change on 60-40 when there's plenty of states that are ahead of us that have the 80-20 breakdown.
So if we can go in reverse order for your questions, that's an excellent question. And I just want to take you back to Senator Watson, I think, made this point earlier, that rankings comparing U.S. states are helpful, but in most cases, we're not providing a world-class education in the U.S. We rank average and below average among top-performing systems around the country, around the world, and so that's not necessarily the ultimate goal of the blueprint, but in the short term, certainly that is why the recommendation is that we really need to make sure we have fully licensed teachers in all our classrooms before we move to try to implement collaborative time and bring on more teachers, so that we can make sure that every classroom has a great teacher. So that's the only way we're going to achieve the
Which goes
blueprint's
back
goals.
to the point that I think the superintendents have been making about what's realistic. So thank you for that.
I didn't say that everything they said was not realistic. A good part of what they said is, in fact, realistic, and I support some of what they've said, and we've provided ample examples. We've met with them to go through that. But if you take literally, despite the comment that you just made, and go through all the items in here, you'll see something that's very clear. It would mean delay, cost, and a time frame in which they have selected. That's what I'm saying. And so you can't, yeah, but achievable when? That's the question. That gets us back to going back to the swimming analogies that I gave. So I'm not suggesting they want the right thing for all of the students in Maryland. They are these are very dedicated people about that. I just disagree with the time frame for which they are suggesting some of these things in here, not all. That means achievable, but achievable when? And keep in mind now, we've had this system for a long period of time, and it produced results ultimately that got us to 40 and 43. You made the decision that that was unacceptable. I was not part of the current commission. Had I been part of the current commission, there would probably be some things I would have done differently with this plan. I'm here to help implement the plan that you've decided, at least the General Assembly, that you want. In order to do so, I'm telling you that there are changes that need to be made, but you need to walk through these changes carefully. Otherwise, you'll start swimming back.
Okay, Senator Brooks, why don't you have the last word? We do need to move on, so Senator Brooks, you get the final question for this panel.
Thanks for the presentation. And I understand the 80-20 versus the 60-40. It would be ideal, but at the same time, I know that that would present some substantial budgetary challenges, especially with the current climate that we're in now. So is there, you were saying you're going to spread that out over the next few years, yeah, that that the 80, I mean, the 60/40, how did you come up with that? Is that just the ideal, you feel? What was?
It was based on looking at those top performing systems around the world and, you know, on average, how much time they spend in front of the classroom versus doing other things during the day. But I wouldn't say that it's like a magic number. So I think that that's another part of those pilot programs that we want to see happen so that the LEAs can experiment with how to implement collaborative time, how much collaborative time they're able to provide, and what can be accomplished in that time. So I think those pilot programs will give us that opportunity to get some evidence to then be able to potentially come back and say, you know what, it doesn't need to be 60%. It needs to be a certain range or something like that.
Yeah, because I was thinking you were probably talking about more classroom, and you were saying between 12 and 15,000 additional teachers. So that that would be some, here again, a tremendous budgetary challenge, so.
It also, I will say on the class size question, it creates trade-offs between class size and number of teachers in the building, because they're two different measures, but sort of the teacher-student ratio would definitely go down. There would be more teachers per student, but it wouldn't necessarily help to address class sizes becoming larger. So I think there are trade-offs that need to be considered.
Okay, Mr. CE.
Mr. Chair, have you had the budgetary impact of the collaborative time questions associated with the physical impact as yet?
Well, we had a fiscal briefing yesterday. I don't know that it got granular on that specific item. In fact, I think Mr. Romans, who was here, said that the governor has not like scored it at his level. DLS has not done some independent analysis. So I think the answer to that is, as of right now, no.
Yeah, I think we probably need to do that in order to be more responsive to your question on it.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
thank you.
Oh, actually, we have one more presentation, and apparently they have such an analysis. So if you stick around, you might get the answer, okay?
Okay.
Okay, we're going to go to the next panel. Our county superintendents of boards of education. We've got Dr. Sean Bolson, the superintendent from Harford County Public Schools, and Dr. Miriam Rogers, superintendent of Baltimore County Public Schools. Before you proceed, I mean, obviously this is a topic of great interest, and we could have had like 5-hour briefing on this, and so we did have to make some determination. We're already, past where we had allotted. I do know we've got some MABE folks, specifically, and I just want to acknowledge. So we've got Karen Bailey. Karen Bailey still here, the president of our MABE. Okay, and the wife of our own Senator Jack Bailey, and Jen Mallon, who is the legislative committee chair. I'm going to suggest, we didn't actually include you in the formal program because of the time constraints we have, but I really would encourage you, if you don't mind, submitting some written comments, written testimony based on what you heard today. We just really don't have the time, but thanks for being here. And again, I apologize for not being able to incorporate yet another presentation. So this is going to have to be the final presentation. So with that, I'm going to yield to whoever wants to go first, okay?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having us here today. We're not on yet? Just get closer. Got it. So we have some pretty comprehensive talking points here, and we're going to do our very best to consolidate those, and I'm actually going to sort of turn it upside down. We wanted to spend a lot of time talking about the celebrations because we have no shortage of celebrations. We absolutely believe in the goals of the blueprint. I also want to talk about appreciation for those in the AIB and those at MSDE. I think I can say without question, the last 12 months have been the best collaboration we've experienced since the implementation of the blueprint. And I'm one of 6 superintendents who's been in his position since the blueprint became law. And so we've had a lot of change. But we are in a place where I think the collaboration is outstanding. But with that said, again, I'm going to jump to our top line. PZAM and the superintendents put forward 30 recommendations about adjustments we think would help ensure not just that we improve the blueprint, but that we keep it from being crushed under its own weight. Because we're very aware of the financial circumstances this blueprint is leading up to. In those 30 recommendations, we don't have a slide, so the reason we started with our slide about the elephant is none of our recommendations suggested making any changes to the foundation formula. Basically, we believe in order to have a successful plan, like everything, you have to have a strong foundation. And we could spend a great deal of time analyzing where we see one of the greatest challenges in the success of the blueprint really being in the foundation. So our recommendations were meant to not just suggest places where we think we can get the greatest possible return on investment, but also where we can avoid doing harm that might make this swim even harder. Because frankly, our assessment, to extend the metaphor, the adjustment to the collaborative planning time and the cuts that school systems will feel this year, Harford County, we're anticipating about a $4 million cut. In teacher terms, that's about 45 teachers. That's, tying a weight around the swimmer's waist, right? It's making the swim harder. And in the big picture of this, in Harford County, I have done everything I can to avoid making cuts in my system that will harm student achievement. Harford County has the highest percentage of schools with 4 and 5 stars. We had the highest growth rate over the last 2 years in 3rd through 8th grade reading. We have the highest number of apprentices. We have 265 apprentices today in our district. We're doing great things, and I'm about to cut 150 positions, more than 100 of them student-facing. In order to balance my budget, I expect my class sizes to go up by 2 this year. In Harford, people are going to start thinking that this is the blueprint for larger class sizes. That's what we're seeing. I would encourage people to look closely at what's happening with those data as we're talking about everything else happening. Because like I said, we have so many celebrations, and the blueprint is very much the purpose for those. But this proposal about the foundation really needs to be studied. And so with that, I'm going to actually kick it off to Dr. Rogers here, because there are a couple of things coming out that I think that she's going to share a little more about.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We appreciate this opportunity to share some information from the perspective of the superintendents. As Dr. Bolson said, we are in support of the blueprint. We know that the blueprint has made some significant gains and achievement possible for our students across the state of Maryland. Because Dr. Bolson took a little while to brag on Harford County, I have to make sure Baltimore County is represented properly as well. As a result, this year we have the highest percentage improvement across the state in the reduction of chronic absenteeism. On the state assessments for the first time, 13 out of 16 markers, mathematics and literacy, we saw improvements in all of our schools. With the star ratings, we have the highest number of 5-star schools in the state of Maryland, and 38 of our schools improved their star ratings over this year. And what we are invested in across the state is making sure that we continue to see improvements, and we want to work together with the state, with the AIB, and with the governor to make sure that we are thoughtful in our approach moving forward. And so one of the issues that we want to point out is around community schools. We know community schools have made a significant difference in terms of the resources that we can provide to families and students who need it the most. Baltimore County, we have 91 community schools. This funding is at risk in the proposed education bill, SB 429. When we talk about pausing the funding, we should also be thinking about a commensurate pause in the momentum of these programs and the outcomes that they have yielded. We have 90 schools statewide that if we move forward as proposed, they will do the planning for a community school, but the per pupil funding that they're supposed to receive, they will be waiting at least another 2 years to receive that funding to actualize the plans. The abrupt halt for 2 years is a blunt solution to a problem that is not well articulated. We have limited information regarding the necessity to pause this program, and we believe that we can come together and find a more nuanced solution that will not adversely impact students. Again, we are committed to doing the work and seeing successes, and so we want a seat at that table to engage in those conversations. When we talk about Pillar 4, most of the conversations end with community schools, but Pillar 4 is really about resources to ensure that all students are successful. And so we want to bring you the Cliff Notes version, the story of special education students. On slide 12, you have the presentation. You'll find a link chart with 2 tabs. One details special education budgets, reimbursements, and expenditures by school systems, and one details the same for transportation costs. You are looking at the untold story of special education funding. This chart shows you 2 of the LEAs. They're highlighted because they're mid-sized districts, but it explains that local districts across the state of Maryland spend over $1 billion in unreimbursed funds for special education. This $1 billion is essentially the only discretionary funding that is in state education funding. There is so much rigid and prescriptive funding allocations that there's little to no room for innovation or flexibility. Let me be very clear on behalf of all superintendents in Maryland. We understand that these are legitimate costs. They are necessary to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our most vulnerable students. We are committed to providing these services to our students and families. However, there's no denying how extraordinary these costs are and forecasting that these costs will continue to grow across all of our school systems.
Why don't we stop for questions? So we have examples and suggestions by pillar, but understanding the time, I think we could probably respond to those through questions if you have interest in specific pillars or specific elements of our recommendations.
Okay. Okay. What do you from this point? Are you going back to the other pillar? What do you want to give me some sense of kind of what your plan is, and then we can make a decision about when to take questions.
Like I said, we could stop for questions, and then if you have specific
Okay. Well, I think that
we can do that.
we are a little time constrained. We got bill hearings, so I think this. Yes, I would say we're going to take you up on that offer. Questions for these panelists from our county superintendents. We've got Senator Washington.
Thank you both, and thank you for your willingness to provide us some insights about how things actually work on the ground. A blueprint is a blueprint, but then there are people who actually have to build the house, and so we're learning from you. And I also, of course, want to shout out my superintendent, Baltimore County. Appreciate the work you're doing. In terms of, it's not something you were reporting on, but in terms of the number of teachers that are conditionally certified within your own jurisdictions, do you have do you feel that this is contributing, would the reduction of those that are conditionally certified, would that help with some of the pressures you're experiencing? And then 2, the ones that are certified, do you have a sense of what are some of the reasons why, or some of the barriers that I alluded to earlier? So that's just a thing I mentioned earlier.
Go ahead, John.
Sure. So in Baltimore County, we have about 9,000 teachers. We have more than 1,000 at this point who are conditionally certified. Certainly, being fully certified is the preference, as, it gives teachers not only the content knowledge that they need, but also make sure that they're well-versed in pedagogical practices to reach as many learners as possible. There are some things that we've implemented internally to help teachers along, to create our own cohorts, relationships with university partners to help them to move forward. But in terms of what might be helpful, overall, yes, having more fully certified teachers will be helpful, but providing a way to support the teachers while they're in the classroom, making sure that they have the resources that are necessary. As students continue to come in with more needs, our teachers are sharing with us that additional supports are necessary, whether it's in the form of paraprofessionals or other additional assistance. Those are the things that they're raising to us, boots on the ground in the classroom, that are going to make the difference. Surely people would want to grade fewer papers and have more time off, but in terms of what's surfacing to us from our teachers, these are some of the things that they're mentioning, and we also happen to have the highest amount of planning time in the state, and we leave that time protected, so it helps them to get that work done.
Why I ask suggests to us that the fact that there are so many conditionally certified, that is a problem with regard to the implementation of some of the pillars, and particularly the prep time, or that it's contributed, but you're not seeing that's not an impact? Or
I think no matter what the situation is, even if we look 10 years ago, there was always a subset of teachers that were conditionally certified, and everyone would have to be a part of the plan in the same way that we're entrusting them with the responsibilities with the students on a daily basis. Simply being conditionally certified would not, in my experience, be the one reason why we could not move forward with providing more time for teachers to collaborate.
Okay.
Just another perspective on the conditionally certified. So in Hartford, we have 3,000 teachers and about 250 conditionally certified. Nearly 20% of those conditionally certified teachers are in special education. One of the great reasons is that's the area where we see the greatest turnover. And as you can imagine what that does to performance and what kind of liabilities and risk that creates in our special education classrooms. So a connection to that for me is one thing I've been talking about for 3 years is I value what we're doing with NBC teachers as an incentive to keep people in the business, but that's 2 steps removed from keeping people in the classrooms. One of the reasons we've made suggestions about doing something different with the NBC funds is to be able to create incentives that would keep special educators in special education classrooms, because we have many special educators teaching in general ed, but they don't have an incentive to stay in special ed, and to also keep teachers in high poverty schools. Because you've talked about, others have spoken to this afternoon about the turnover we experience there, and that's where our conditional teachers end up. The NBC incentive has helped that a little bit, but we didn't see people moving for those $7,000. So the fact that our conditional teachers are going to those places experiencing more turnover, again, if the incentive were more directly targeted on those 2 places of great need, then I think we'd be able to start to make a difference. And just very simply, one of my schools has the 2nd highest reading growth in the state. It's a Title I school. It's a principal who's been there for many years. And with the work she's done, she's kept her staff there for many years. So the premise of creating longevity in those high-need schools is absolutely right. We just got to get the tools to make that happen, to be a little more targeted.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Hester, then Senator Carrozza.
Okay, Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, would you like them, I mean, I've got like 4 questions on the recommendation. Should they just reply offline, or?
How lengthy are these 4 questions involved?
Well, I mean, I honestly don't understand the recommendation.
How about, why don't you put out the questions, and then we could decide if it's something that is going to be involved, then maybe they can give us offline written response. Why don't you just put the 4 questions out on the table?
Okay, so under Pillar 1, you guys are recommending that the required participation percentage for the mixed delivery system and permanently shift the responsibility of supporting and cultivating private providers to MSDE. So, I mean, I think that would be a pretty big policy shift, right? And so just wondering, you know, why that is and how that will help. Then under Pillar 2, you're asking to amend this statute to remove administrators, assistant principals, and principals from the career ladder. Go ahead. Which I think is something that we actually came back and changed after we passed the original blueprint. So once again, that's another policy decision. Under Pillar 3, I've never really understood this dual enrollment thing, but you're asking for more flexibility to target the funding for tuition and ancillary costs under dual enrollment. And then last but not least, under Pillar 4, you have a suggestion around tiered or different levels of special education funding, which seems like it could make a whole lot of sense. And I'm just curious if you have a benchmark compared to other states. And then under Pillar 5, there was something about 179 reports. And I would certainly be open to, if you need anything help with that, it seems like we'd like to bring that down to take some of the burden off. So those are just 5 of the recommendations that I had questions on. And once again, I'm perfectly happy to have it offline, but I do think at some point, if we're making policy changes based on these recommendations, we're going to have that conversation.
Okay, well, how about, there's 5 specific, yeah, I mean, Stacy, several of these are actually the subject of bill proposals that we're going to have full-blown bill hearings on. So, you know, I don't know that we need to get into great detail here today because they're going to be flushed out. That said, maybe you could just maybe broad stroke, maybe hit a few of the points, and then again, we're going to, some of these bill hearings are going to flush out the topic, you know, the merits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So.
So the question about pre-K in many ways was addressed by the State Board yesterday. So I think that the underlying motivation for that was the fact that we have no leverage over the private providers. And in fact, the superintendents have been advocating for more flexibility for them. And so that's a big part of it. It's hard to have us be accountable for their participation when we have no way to ensure that. So that's a simple response there. In the dual enrollment, where we've just seen, we believe our first priority needs to be to ensure that students who don't have the ability to participate, that has to be our priority. And right now, some of the way this is being implemented is a little upside down with that. Our greatest improvement, and again, lots of great data, I won't go into it, has been in the students who didn't have access before. And so I mean, again, we can talk about that a lot more, but that's really the underlying, giving us the flexibility to make sure we're targeting those students. In special education, the idea of tiered funding, the example that came to the table, Delaware has a model like that, so that might be something to look at, and then we can come back to that later. Because, you know, special education, by its nature, is a very diverse set of needs. And you go from a minimal increase to serve some students to some students we spend more than $200,000 a student on. And so to be funded at an average amount really doesn't make sense because, you know, how your student population special ed shakes out could mean that you do very well in that model or you don't. And then the 179 reports, any help we can, can provide because our folks are, I'm cutting positions and I really want to, I'm taking it out at the top level too, but they're the ones doing the reports. So any help would be great.
Okay. I have one question, but I think it ties everything together. Going to your recommendations on local school districts need greater flexibility in budgeting. And I've heard this directly from all 3 of the superintendents in my district. It says, we ask that MSDE and AIB respect the diversity of the 24 LEAs and superintendents and local boards to appropriately manage resources to address their priorities. Absolutely agree with you and will help you with that. However, what I want to pull together is your other partners. Your partners are the boards of education. Your partners are the counties. And so when I see then this recommendation, and then I see at the end of your presentation advising us to resist reductions to the blueprint until an updated fiscal analysis is completed. I don't see the county role in this because, as you well know, a lot of these budget pressures have been pushed to the county because the blueprint's not funded for the out years. So I'm just, I think it's really important that if we're going to make adjustments that affect you all locally for the blueprint, that they're, that you do talk about blueprint reductions overall. So I want to, again, we haven't talked about the role of the counties, and I want to give you the opportunity to do so and to talk about that coordination.
Thank you for that question. I can speak to Baltimore County. We are very fortunate to have a strong, positive, productive relationship with county government. As all of superintendents, when we talk through this, we absolutely believe that there is a role to engage in these conversations with county government. And I think the nuances, we are asking for a pause on the reductions as they've been presented. The purpose of all of us coming together and engaging in that deep dive is to identify reductions that will keep the blueprint going on for a longer period of time without impacting the achievement of students or doing any harm in the school systems. And so I think every school superintendent to a person would agree that the aim is to be able to engage in conversations thoughtfully and at the same time with county government partners. I think all of us have presented to our boards of education potential implications, gone through pillar by pillar and what that means for our respective communities. And there is, widespread understanding that there are changes that have to be made, and really our advocacy is around how we make those changes moving forward. But I think there's support for working together with county governments, understanding and respecting that, jurisdictions and counties are in different places in terms of the funding that's available to help meet the aims of the blueprint.
I think that's a really important acknowledgement. I went back and looked at your, you said we asked the committee to resist reductions to the blueprint until an updated fiscal analysis is completed. I don't know what that time frame looks like because we're, obviously looking at this now, but I just, when I saw that and didn't see the recognition of the county, so I'll look forward to continuing to work with you and all the partners on this.
Absolutely.
One thing I'd add that I think needs to be analyzed here is helping everyone understand the local share and the state share and what is captured in the local share, because that's where our challenge locally is to have them explain that we want them that they need to fund the local share, and that's required of them. But there have to be open conversations about what's not in there and how we're going to do that too. And I think it's something that we all need to have a better understanding of.
And I think the final point I was making is if we're going to give relief on blueprint and deadlines for the future, that corresponds with reductions in the blueprint. And just getting an acknowledgement of that. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Senator Brooks for the final question.
Thanks, Chair. I guess my colleague just asked my question, so I'll pass. But I will, since I've got the mic, give a shout out to my superintendent, Dr. Rogers. Thanks for being here.
Okay, Gail. Well, thank you to both of you for testimony and everybody who testified today. That concludes our briefing on the blueprint. We're going to take our technically required 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and efficiently run through some bills, and then we'll be done. So 5 minutes, folks.
Thank you.
You staying for Harford County night?
Yeah, I'm teaching the first time in Oregon. I just started as my second week, so I was hoping to here.
And she chaired before. She chaired, it wasn't called policy area board. Yeah. Yeah.